My name is Sarah, and I'm an architectural historian. Or, I was before this. My specialty is uncovering the forgotten stories behind old buildings, the eccentricities of the people who designed them. The Eldridge estate was supposed to be my magnum opus. A sprawling, Gothic revival mansion perched on a cliff overlooking the churning Atlantic. It was the final, most ambitious project of Alastair Eldridge, a brilliant but notoriously reclusive architect from the late 19th century. He died in that house, a rumored suicide, and the property had been locked up, untouched, for over a century. A distant relative, wanting to sell it, hired me to catalog its historical significance. From the moment I stepped onto the overgrown grounds, a chill snaked its way down my spine that had nothing to do with the sea air. The house itself was a labyrinth of shadows, echoing with the silence of 100 years. Every corner felt heavy, every floorboard groaned underfoot as if burdened by unseen presences. Eldridge was known for his hidden passages, his secret nooks and crannies. It was a game to him, a way of imprinting his eccentric genius onto the very structure of his creations. But the Eldridge estate felt different. It felt deliberate, malevolent even. I spent weeks there, meticulously documenting every detail. The opulent ballrooms, the grand library, the forgotten servants' quarters. Each day, the house seemed to grow larger, more complex, its secrets whispering just out of reach. I found the usual hidden compartments, a secret liquor cabinet behind a sliding panel in the study, a concealed staircase leading to the attic tucked behind a bookcase. But I knew Eldridge. He always had one final flourish, one last, profound secret. And I was convinced it was here, in his own home. My search led me to the master bedroom, a vast chamber with a massive four-poster bed and a fireplace so large you could walk into it. The room had a peculiar aura, a cold spot that no amount of roaring fire could ever truly dispel. I noticed a subtle discrepancy in the wallpaper pattern on one wall, a barely perceptible shift in the floral design. It was so faint, I almost dismissed it as a flaw in the paper itself. But my gut, honed by years of sniffing out architectural anomalies, told me otherwise. I spent an entire day just running my hands along that section of wall, tapping, pushing, feeling for any give. My fingers grazed over a minuscule, almost invisible seam, a faint line where two panels of plaster met with unnerving precision. It was camouflaged perfectly, blending into the ornate plasterwork and dark wood paneling. I found the hidden latch behind a heavy velvet curtain, a small, brass lever almost indistinguishable from the decorative motifs. With a soft click, a section of the wall slid inward, revealing a gap, a sliver of inky blackness. The air that rushed out was cold, stagnant, and carried that strange, sweet, earthy scent. It wasn't the dust and decay of a typical hidden room. It was something deeper, older. I shined my flashlight into the void. It wasn't a room, not in the traditional sense. It was a narrow, unlit passage, curving gently downwards. My heart hammered against my ribs, a mixture of exhilaration and a primal fear I couldn't quite place. This was it. Eldridge's ultimate secret. I grabbed my bag, my more powerful expedition flashlight, and a small crowbar, just in case. Stepping into the passage felt like stepping into another dimension. The air was thick, heavy, muffling the sounds of the house behind me. The passage walls were rough, hewn stone, not the polished brickwork I'd expected. It felt less like an architectural feature and more like a naturally occurring tunnel, or something far more ancient, that had simply been incorporated into the house's foundation. The passage sloped ever downward, the faint light from the master bedroom fading quickly until I was enveloped in complete darkness. Save for the beam of my flashlight, the silence was profound, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the scuff of my boots on the damp stone floor. It felt like I was descending into the very bowels of the earth. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into a larger space. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing not a grand vault, nor a hidden study, but a cavern. A natural cave system, it seemed, carved out of the rock beneath the mansion. The air here was even colder, and that sickly sweet smell was more potent. It was here that I saw them. Arranged in a rough circle, almost as if in some macabre ceremony, were a series of stone pillars, not carved, but naturally occurring stalagmites, some as tall as a man, and on each pillar, resting in a shallow depression, was a small, crudely carved wooden idol. They were grotesque, unsettling figures, with elongated limbs and vacant, staring eyes. They didn't look like any religious iconography I had ever encountered. They felt pre-human, alien, and then I saw the altar. In the center of the circle of pillars, a flat, dark slab of stone, slick with a glistening, viscous substance. My flashlight beam lingered there for a moment too long, and my blood ran cold. There were carvings on the altar, symbols I didn't recognize, etched deep into the stone. And dried stains. Dark, rusty stains. A sudden draft of air, cold and damp, snuffed out my flashlight. I gasped, plunging into absolute blackness. My heart leaped into my throat. I fumbled for my spare, my hands shaking. That sweet, cloying smell was overpowering now, filling my lungs. I could hear it then, faint at first, then growing louder. A whisper, not words but a low, guttural murmur, a chorus of sibilant sounds that seemed to undulate from the very walls of the cave. And that scuttling sound, a closer now echoing from the dark recesses beyond the circle of pillars. Panic seized me. This wasn't Eldridge's secret study, his hidden vault of architectural drawings. This was something else entirely. Something ancient and malevolent. Something he had discovered, and perhaps worshipped. I scrambled backward, tripping over something on the damp floor. My head struck the cold stone with a sickening crack, and the world dissolved into the blackness that now enveloped me completely. And now I'm here, bound, smelling that awful sweet rot. That whisper is still there, and the scuttling. It's closer. Much, much closer. I realize now that Eldridge didn't just hide a room. He hid a gateway. And I, in my naive pursuit of history, had stumbled through it. The true secret of the Eldridge estate wasn't some architectural marvel. It was the horror it contained. And it wasn't dormant. It was waiting. And I think it knows I'm here. The house swallowed my daughter. My wife whispered. Her voice raw, cracked. Not quite human. Her eyes were fixed on the freshly plastered wall in the living room. The one we'd put up just last week to cover that strange, dark alcove we found during renovations. She hadn't slept in days, hadn't eaten. She just sat there, staring, occasionally mouthing that one terrifying sentence. I didn't know what to do. I'd seen the alcove, felt the cold air it emanated, but I also saw the plaster. It was solid, unbroken. And our daughter, Lily, was just gone. No note, no open doors, no sign of a struggle. Just gone. And my wife, she was convinced that behind that new, smooth wall was the answer. And deep down, a part of me, a part I desperately wanted to deny, was starting to agree. We'd bought the house a year ago, a charming, albeit slightly neglected, Victorian-era property on the outskirts of a small, sleepy town. It had good bones, a sprawling garden, and was exactly what we needed for our growing family. Lily, our 5-year-old, loved exploring every nook and cranny. She was a bright, imaginative child, always making up stories about the fairies in the garden, or the friendly ghosts in the attic. We called her our little adventurer. The renovations started innocently enough. We wanted to modernize the kitchen and open up the living space. That's when we found it. Behind a rather ugly, built-in bookshelf in the living room, the contractor's crowbar hit something hollow. We pulled away more plaster, and there it was, an alcove, about 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, recessed deep into the wall. It wasn't a closet, nor a fireplace. It was just an empty space. Dark and cold, even on a summer's day. There was something unsettling about it. The air inside felt strangely still, almost heavy, and distinctly colder than the rest of the room. It smelled faintly of old wood and something else, something metallic and sharp, like ozone after a lightning strike. The oddest thing was that the back wall of the alcove wasn't rough brick, or the typical lath and plaster of the house. It was a smooth, dark, almost obsidian-like stone, completely unlike any other material in the house. Our contractor, a grizzled old-timer named Frank who'd worked on half the houses in the county, scratched his head. Never seen anything like it, he'd mumbled. Don't look like it was ever meant to be open. Almost like a natural formation, just built around. He suggested we just plaster over it. No point in trying to figure out what it was. It wasn't structural, just an anomaly. We agreed. We had a baby on the way, and a 5-year-old who might try to climb in there. Best to seal it up. The day we plastered it over, I felt a strange sense of relief. The cold spot vanished, the unsettling smell dissipated. The living room felt warmer, brighter. We painted the wall a cheerful cream, and the incident of the strange alcove became a quirky anecdote we'd tell friends. 2 weeks after the plaster dried, Lily vanished. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, making her a snack. My wife, Eleanor, was out running errands. Lily was playing with her dolls in the living room. I heard her giggling, humming a little tune. Then, silence. A profound, unnatural silence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I called her name. Lily. Sweetheart. No answer. I walked into the living room. Her dolls were neatly arranged on the rug. Her favorite teddy bear was propped up on the sofa. The front door was locked. The back door was locked. The windows were all closed. There was no way out. I searched the entire house, my heart beginning to pound with a frantic rhythm. Every closet, under every bed, the attic, the basement. Nothing, no sign of her. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Had she somehow slipped out? But how? We lived in a quiet neighborhood, but a child wandering off usually meant someone saw something. No one had. Eleanor came home an hour later to find me tearing the house apart, frantic, my voice hoarse from shouting Lily's name. When I told her, her face went utterly slack, devoid of all color. She dropped her grocery bags, and a jar of olives shattered on the tile floor. We called the police. They searched thoroughly. Dogs, forensics, the whole 9 yards. They found nothing. No forced entry, no struggle, no evidence of an abduction. It was as if she had simply evaporated. That night, as the house filled with the hollow echo of our unanswered calls for Lily, Eleanor went into the living room. She sat on the sofa, not moving, just staring at the freshly painted wall. The cream-colored wall where the alcove used to be. The house swallowed her, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I tried to talk sense into her, to remind her about the plaster, the paint. But she wouldn't listen. She wouldn't even look at me. Over the next few days, Eleanor's obsession grew. She wouldn't leave that spot in the living room. She barely ate, barely slept. She just stared at the wall. And the more she stared, the more I started to feel it too. That subtle coldness returning to that section of the room. That faint, metallic smell. One evening, I sat beside her, trying to comfort her, trying to pull her away. She pointed a trembling finger at the wall. Listen, she commanded, her eyes wide, glistening with unshed tears. I listened. At first, I heard nothing but the creaks and groans of an old house settling. Then, I heard it. Very faint. A sound I hadn't heard in days. A child's giggle. Lily's giggle. It was impossibly distant, as if coming from very far away, but it was unmistakably her. It was muffled, ethereal, as if filtered through layers of stone and plaster. But it was there. My blood ran cold. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, a cruel trick of grief. But Eleanor heard it too. Her face, pale and drawn, suddenly became alive with a terrifying, desperate hope. She's in there, she whispered, her voice filled with an unnerving certainty. The house took her. She's behind the wall. I knew, logically, it was impossible. But the giggle, it wasn't a memory. It was real. It was happening now. Over the next few days, the giggling became more frequent, sometimes accompanied by a faint, childish humming. And the wall, it wasn't just cold anymore. It felt hungry. It radiated an energy that I couldn't explain, a presence that made the hair on my neck prickle. Eleanor, fueled by a mother's desperate instinct, started scratching at the wall with her bare hands, tearing at the paint, then the plaster beneath. I tried to stop her, but her strength was immense, fueled by a singular, terrifying purpose. I watched in horror as she slowly, painstakingly, began to uncover the smooth, dark, obsidian, like stone of the alcove's back wall. As more of the dark surface was revealed, the coldness intensified, radiating outwards like a blast of icy air. The metallic smell grew stronger, like an electric storm trapped within the room, and the sounds from behind the wall intensified. Not just Lily's giggles, but other sounds. Faint whispers, the distant rustling of something unseen, like a breeze through dry leaves. And then, a low, resonant thrumming, a deep vibration that seemed to emanate from the very stone itself, resonating in my chest. I watched, paralyzed by a creeping dread, as Eleanor's frantic fingers scraped away the last of the plaster. The dark stone surface of the alcove's back wall was fully exposed. And then, something impossible happened. The surface of the dark stone shimmered. It rippled, like water disturbed by a pebble. And in the center, a faint, swirling vortex of purple and black began to form, like a miniature galaxy. It pulsed, slowly at first, then faster, drawing the air from the room, making it hard to breathe. From within the swirling darkness, a small hand reached out. It was undeniably Lily's hand, small and pale, with a faint scar on her little finger from when she fell off her bike. It beckoned, slowly, gently. And from the darkness, I could hear her voice, clear as a bell, full of innocent joy. "Daddy, Mommy, come play with me." Eleanor cried out, a sound of pure, unadulterated longing, and lunged for the hand. I tried to grab her, to pull her back, to stop her from touching whatever impossible horror was behind that wall. But I was too late. Her fingers brushed against Lily's. And in that instant, Eleanor was gone. Pulled through the swirling vortex, as if she were made of smoke. The vortex contracted, the hand vanished, and the dark stone wall shimmered once more, returning to its smooth, featureless surface. The coldness retreated. The metallic smell faded. The giggles and whispers ceased. I'm standing here now, alone in my living room, staring at a perfectly smooth, cream-colored wall, a wall that has swallowed my entire family. Sometimes very late at night, when the house is utterly silent, I think I hear a faint whisper from that wall, a whisper that sounds like Lily, or maybe Eleanor, or perhaps something else entirely, inviting me to come and play, and I fear, with a cold, absolute certainty, that one day I will answer. I still see their eyes, thousands of them, staring out from the darkness, unblinking, unmoving. They aren't paintings, not really. They are impressions. Faces etched into the very rock, some screaming, some weeping, some with expressions of profound, unsettling peace. And in the center of it all, that one face, the one that broke me, the one that looked exactly like mine. I'm trapped down here, in the cold, damp silence, with a flickering candle as my only companion. I found the hidden door, I walked through it, and now I'm just another forgotten face, waiting to join the gallery, waiting to become part of the stone itself. My name is Arthur, and I was an artist, a sculptor, specifically. My passion was finding beauty in the forgotten, the discarded. I specialized in found art, repurposing old materials into new, meaningful forms. When I heard about the abandoned mining town of Blackwood, high in the remote mountains, I knew it was calling to me. A place rich with history, with the ghosts of forgotten lives, and mountains of discarded metal and wood just waiting to be transformed. The town had been deserted for almost a century after a catastrophic cave, in that supposedly claimed dozens of lives. The remaining residents packed up and left, leaving everything behind. It was a ghost town in the truest sense of the word. Rusting equipment, collapsing cabins, and an eerie silence that permeated everything. The air was thin, crisp, and carried the scent of pine and damp earth. I set up a makeshift studio in the largest abandoned cabin, its windows long since shattered, letting in the biting wind. For weeks, I scoured the ruins, collecting old tools, twisted pieces of metal, fragments of glass, and weathered wood. I was in my element, finding inspiration in the decay, piecing together the narrative of this lost community through its forgotten remnants. My attention was drawn to the old mine entrance. It was a gaping maw in the mountainside, partially collapsed and boarded up with rotting planks. A sign, faded and barely legible, warned of unstable conditions and dangerous gases. But something about it called to me. The stories of the cave, the lives lost. It all felt like a tragic masterpiece waiting to be uncovered. I knew it was foolish, but the artist in me couldn't resist. I wanted to see what was inside, to maybe salvage some of the old mining equipment, to understand the raw, visceral reality of what had happened. Over several days, I carefully pried away the old boards, revealing a narrow, dark passage. The air that rushed out was cold damp, and carried the faint, metallic scent of iron ore and something else, something indescribably ancient and earthy. I donned a headlamp and ventured inside, carefully navigating the loose rock and debris. The tunnel was rough, unlined, clearly dug in haste. It wound its way deeper into the mountain, the beam of my headlamp illuminating glistening veins of mineral and the occasional skeletal timber support. I kept my focus on the ground, watching for unstable sections, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. After about 50 feet, the main tunnel branched off. To the left, a larger, more established tunnel, likely the main shaft. To the right, a much narrower, almost hidden passage, almost entirely obscured by a rockfall that looked as though it had been deliberately placed. Something about that blocked passage intrigued me. It felt personal, like someone had tried to hide it. It took me another day of careful work, using a crowbar and sheer determination to clear enough of the rockfall to squeeze through. The passage beyond was even narrower, forcing me to hunch over. It was also surprisingly smooth, the rock appearing almost polished in places. Unlike the rough, hewn nature of the rest of the mine, there were no timber supports here, just solid rock. And the air felt different, oddly still, as if no wind had touched it in centuries. As I ventured deeper, the passage began to widen, eventually opening into a large, natural cavern. My headlamp beam swept across the expanse, and I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. The walls of the cavern were not bare rock. They were covered in faces. Thousands upon thousands of them, stretching as far as my light could reach, etched into the dark stone. They weren't carved with tools. They looked as if they had been pressed into the rock, like molds, or perhaps, like the very essence of a person had been forced onto the stone. They varied wildly in expression, some serene, eyes closed in what looked like peaceful sleep, others wide-eyed with terror, mouths agape in silent screams, some weeping, tears seemingly frozen in the stone. There were old faces, young faces, men, women, children. It was a vast, chilling tapestry of humanity, trapped forever in the rock. It wasn't a gallery, not in the artistic sense. It was a monument to suffering, a silent archive of lost souls. The sheer number was overwhelming, the detail unnerving. I could almost feel their emotions radiating from the stone, a palpable wave of grief, despair, and terror. I walked slowly through the cavern, my headlamp beam dancing across the faces. Each one seemed to pull at my gaze, demanding to be seen, demanding its story to be acknowledged. I ran my hand over one, the smooth, cool stone feeling unnervingly like flesh. How could this be? Who made this? And why? As I reached the center of the cavern, I saw it. A raised platform of stone, and on it, a single, perfectly smooth, unblemished section of rock, almost like a mirror. And above it, a single, exquisitely carved wooden frame, empty. My breath hitched. The frame was ancient, intricately detailed, clearly made by human hands, unlike the faces themselves. It was an invitation. An altar, perhaps. And as I stared at the empty space within the frame, a horrifying realization began to dawn on me. I felt a sudden, intense chill, much colder than the ambient temperature of the cave. The air grew heavy, thick with that metallic, earthy scent, but now, it was tinged with something else, ozone, and a faint, sweet smell like decay. My headlamp began to flicker, its beam dimming, then brightening erratically. And then, in the center of the unblemished stone, where the empty frame hung, a new face began to form. Slowly, terrifyingly, it began to emerge from the rock, as if a sculptor were working from the inside out, pushing it forth. First the faint outline of a chin, then a jawline, the curve of a cheek. And it was my face. My features rendered in chilling, perfect detail. My eyes, wide with a dawning horror, staring back at me from the stone. My mouth slightly ajar, as if about to scream. I stumbled backward, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't some natural phenomenon. This was deliberate, and the faces weren't just etched into the rock. They were becoming the rock. The headlamp died then, plunging the cavern into absolute darkness. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound that was instantly swallowed by the vast silence. I fumbled for my phone, but my hands were shaking too violently to find it. I could feel something then. A presence. Not hostile, not overtly menacing, but profoundly ancient and hungry. It was the spirit of the mountain, or something that resided within it, something that fed on the essence of those who ventured too deep, too close to its secrets. The faces were not victims, they were offerings. I heard a soft scraping sound, then another, coming from all directions. And that sickeningly sweet smell intensified, making my head swim. I felt a cold, delicate touch on my cheek, then on my arm. It wasn't human. It was like 1,000 unseen hands, reaching out, guiding me, pushing me gently but relentlessly towards that central platform, towards the empty frame where my face was now fully formed, staring out from the stone. I fought, thrashed. But my movements were sluggish, my body heavy, as if made of lead. The whispers started then, a chorus of faint, mournful voices, echoing from the thousands of faces on the walls. They weren't words, but a single, drawn-out sigh, a collective moan of acceptance. I am on the platform now, the cold stone seeping into my bones. The flickering candle, which I don't remember lighting, casts long, dancing shadows. The faces on the walls seem to shimmer, their eyes following my every move. And my own face, in the empty frame, is waiting. It looks calm now, eerily serene. And I can feel it, the stone slowly, inexorably, claiming me, pulling me into its cold embrace. Soon, I will be just another face in the gallery. Another forgotten soul, trapped forever in the rock. And someone else, an artist, an adventurer, will find this hidden door. And they will come down here. And they will see my face, and the cycle will continue.